That second thought, I was thinking, what am I possibly going to be able to teach the DAR when they really are, I see you as like experts in the Constitution. You probably had so many constitutional speakers and studied it so much yourself that I thought, I'm certainly not qualified to stand in front of you and teach you. So I thought, when I looked at the internet and checked you out, I see that your focus is on education. If I can summarize here, I know I got my tense off. Promoting, preserving, and securing, promoting patriotism. I don't need to read that to you. But what I see is that your focus is on education. So I thought, let me define my own role here so that I can educate the educators, in a sense, train the trainers. If you're out in the public talking to other groups of kids and teachers, what tidbits about the Constitution can I show you that you could demonstrate on a napkin at McDonald's? Would that be something of value to you? So instead of looking for some discrete, obscure fact about the Constitution, that some trivia that maybe nobody else knows that I could share with you, I'm going to share some things that you may already know, but I'm just going to present them in a little bit different way. So the assignment I gave myself was these 3 or 4 things that we'll talk about today. The purpose of the government. Talk about, this is what Donna asked me to talk about, was what were the Founding Fathers thinking when they created our system of government? I'm going to spend most time talking about that, talk about where our rights come from, and I have a feeling that I'm just not going to have a lot of time to talk about how our Founding Fathers wanted to put limits on the Constitution. So, because a lot of you deal with schools and so forth, let me ask, how many of you, when you were in school, took a music lesson? Piano, clarinet? Well, it's just about everybody in here. So, Nan, what did you study?
I studied under a piano under Dave Brubeck's mother.
Wow. So you learned kind of from the best. Do you play the piano today?
I dabble.
Oh.
My right finger does great. I mean, my left hand has trouble.
Trouble and you dabble. Well, I'm going to guess that some of you have kids or grandkids that are involved in athletics, baseball, football, Little League. Would that be a fair assumption? How many hours do we have our kids spend, or did we spend, studying under David Brubeck's mother? Probably countless hours at the piano, right?
Yeah, but I used practice as an excuse for not drying the dishes.
So there was a practical outcome to that. But let's say you had a kid in Little League and he just wasn't a good pitcher or batter. You'd probably have lots of practices, lots of preparations for games. Probably get him special training, get him time in the batting cages. The point I'm making is, we as a society put a lot of value on those things that, in the long run, don't make a big difference. Are any of you professional musicians now? And yet almost all of you raised your hand when I asked if you had music lessons. I'm going to guess you may have spent, I don't know, let's say 1,000 hours at the piano or at the clarinet or at the keyboard. If you spent thousands of hours at the piano and you turned out to be a lousy pianist, what would the consequences to society be? Well, what if you were in high school, and by the time you graduated from high school, you had had a total of 37 hours of civics and government, which is typically what our students get. And then you went out to vote and didn't understand our system of government. What impact could that have on the future of our country? point I'm making is we've got our emphasis totally wrong. Our students should be spending hours every week practicing about our Constitution, learning about our system of government. Just last night on the news, I heard one I should have been preparing for this, but I was looking at a way of getting out of preparing for my talk.
I didn't make things easy for you.
Somebody was going around with a microphone asking people if they thought it was fair that Obama not have a teleprompter during his debates. Everybody they interviewed says, well, that's totally unfair to our president. Of course he needs a teleprompter during the debates. I thought, how sad. These people don't even know what a debate is about. So if I can empower you to emphasize the importance, well, like apparently that's in your precepts. You know it's important. I guess I'm just telling you, man, is it ever important? So if I can empower the teachers and empower you to go out and spread the word, then you are leveraging some of my beliefs.
I have a grandson from Paraguay. Every once in a while he came up here and went to school. He spent the 8th grade with us. He came home really disgusted because in Paraguay he goes to the American school. Morning is English, afternoon is Spanish. He came home really disgusted. Nana, no one in the room knew what domestic tranquility meant.
And I would think that the overseas schools would be better than ours. I would think. Maybe not. DOD. Who knows? Let's talk about the purpose of government. Can anybody tell me in a few words what the purpose of having a government is?
Protection.
Protecting. Excellent. Protecting what?
Protecting us.
Protecting.
Citizens.
Protection of citizens, so that's us. Protecting our property. Protecting our rights. So I would say all of those are correct answers. When we look at the scope of government, this is something you could do on a napkin at McDonald's. There's really an infinite number of types of government that would go from 100% totalitarian government down to zero government, which would be anarchy. So in the few minutes I have, I'm going to go maybe a little bit too quickly through this, but this is how I would describe government. On this side, on one side, we have a total totalitarian government. This would be like the king who owns all of the lands, all of the briars and the berry bushes. Every deer, every rabbit belongs to the king, and you are just a subject on his land. In that arena would be the dictator, think of the Idi Amins who control everything, the pharaoh, the Nero, the Caesar. And on everything. On this end is anarchy. And the anarchists typically use this A symbol that looks almost like a star. They say, no laws, no rules apply to me. Now funny, I've talked to a couple of them, and I said, well yeah, you probably do obey the laws and pay your taxes. Nope, not me. Well, when you ride your motorcycle, do you stay on the right side? Well, yeah, because that's the law. Well, if you drive on the wrong side, you get killed. Oh, capital punishment. Capital punishment for those who disobey that law. You put gasoline in your motorcycle? Yep. Well, you're paying your taxes too. Good. So there really is no anarchy. Even those folks on Occupy Wall Street who say, we're anarchists, and they also chant, this is what democracy looks like. Have you seen that? Okay, we'll get to that in a moment. Let's talk about some of these varying shades of gray now. There really are very few pure dictators. Most governmental systems are what's called an oligarchy. CHY? Oligarchy. Are all of you familiar with this term? An oligarchy is typically a rule by many, a committee, a Politburo, a committee.
We're an oligarchy.
What's that?
We run my committee here.
Almost every government on the planet today is an oligarchy. Even many of the kings really had an oligarchy because they relied on their ministers and their advisors and their consultants. So an oligarchy is typically a rule by an elite few. The king would call his best, smartest people together to be his advisors. So it's going to be an elite, more educated group that serves as those consultants. I see mother and daughter on opposite sides of the room. Wink, 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 wink.
Maybe we're not.
When you said the elite were educated, I went, no, it's the ones that got conned into serving on the committee.
The one that missed the meeting that gets nominated. So another type of government is a democracy.
Would that be Russia, then, the oligarchy with the elite?
Yes.
Yes, exactly. Most socialist countries really fit that standard stereotype of the oligarchy. A democracy is ruled by everyone. Think of the out in the Wild West. There's a shooting, and somebody goes back into town and rounds up the posse and all the townspeople, and all the townspeople go out there and find the one cowboy left standing. Well, you must be the shooter. Kill him, kill him, kill him, hang him, hang him. And so the crowd starts shouting, and most of the crowd is louder than it's too loud. They just hang him high, and they string him up and hang the cowboy right then and there. Well, that's a democracy. That's what a democracy looks like. You may remember the Democratic Convention when they had a vote there.
Yes.
And they needed a 2/3 majority, and they looked for a voice vote. That's a democracy. When they just take a voice vote and make a decision from there. So a democracy is what I would call rule by mob. I would not ever want to live in a democracy. If we were a democracy right here, and if we took a vote, you might say, first thing we do is get all the guys in the room have to clean up. Okay, well that sucks. Okay. Or we could take a vote and say, we're all in a lifeboat, there's not enough food or room for all of us, so we're going to throw all the people with blue eyes overboard. We could do that. I mean, if that's what you're gone. You're gone. So,
And I can't swim.
You are gone.
So a mob can make any sort of rules and change their mind just as quickly as the wind blows. So, how would you like to be a black in 1950 or 1790? No, you don't want to live in a democracy. So what we have is a republic, obviously, you know this. So we're not a rule by edict. We're not a rule by an elite group. We're not a rule by mob. We're a rule of law. But in your preamble here, in your, we call it the creed, you recognize that we're a republic, but we're a democracy in a republic. I'm going to expand on that in just a moment. But I'm going to go back and look at each of these types of government, and let's analyze it a little bit. These three are all ruled by man. Man is fallible. Man is corruptible. This is ruled by law. Think of law as something that's etched in stone and not changeable. Now, the group has decided on it, but to go back to that analogy in the Wild West, when the posse goes out and captures that suspect, instead of hanging him high, like they would do in a democracy, in a republic ruled by law, they would take that lone cowboy back to the town and put him on trial, and they would look at the facts surrounding the case, and they would compare those facts with the rule of law, and then decide his guilt or innocence. And if he's guilty, then they would hang him high. So there's a huge difference between a republic and a democracy. But each of these types of governments has advantages and obviously some disadvantages. What might be an advantage of a king, a kingdom? Well, the best thing is that a king can make decisions quickly. He doesn't have to consult anybody. He can quickly say, off with his head. Build a pyramid here. So decisions come fast. But one of the disadvantages is there may not be a lot of freedom. If you happen to shoot the wrong deer, you better hide him or chop him up really quick, because if the king didn't give you permission to shoot his deer, it could be a bad outcome. So the beautiful thing about having a kingdom is how quickly decisions are made. In an oligarchy, what might be one of the advantages? Well, let me submit that in a group of educated elitists, groups typically make better decisions than individuals. The group can come together, debate, look at all sides of a situation, and then issue an edict. So there are some real advantages to having an elite group make decisions. So decisions are better in an oligarchy. How about in a democracy? What's an advantage to a democracy?
Everybody that gets a voice.
Everybody has a vote. Everybody has a voice so that they feel like they're a part of it. Now, they may or may not be, but at least their voice is heard. So that is important to the nature of man. So when our founding fathers sat down to create our Declaration of Independence, our Constitution, they looked at each of these forms of government, and then they went off and formed a republic. But in their infinite wisdom, they crafted that republic to include each of these elements. So perhaps you can see that they took the advantages of a king or a pharaoh or a dictator, and they gave those abilities to make quick decisions, and they put that with our executive director, our president. An oligarchy that ruled by committee, that power was given to our judicial branch in the Supreme Court, that are ruled by those learned judges, those few, would come up with better decisions than an individual. And to give everybody else a voice, a vote, they created a legislative branch, which is representative. So you can see that our government is set up with really even though we're a republic, we have the best elements of every other form of government built inside. So you see how you could describe this to a high school kid on a napkin at McDonald's? We'll take it a step farther now. Let's look at how all of these people come into their office. Who is appointed and who is elected? How does a president gain his post? No, we are not popular vote. It's through the electoral college. So in the state of California, for example, if 49% vote for an R or a D, and the other 51% vote for the D or the R, the entire electoral college, we're a winner-take-all state. So it really doesn't matter about the popular vote. The electoral college doesn't even need to look at the popular vote. They have no obligation. They can appoint the president. So the president is actually appointed by 1,174 people in the electoral college. How about the justices of the Supreme Court? We elect them? They're appointed. They're appointed by the president and then confirmed by the Senate. How about our senators, elected or appointed? Well, let's go back to when the Constitution was written. How did our founding fathers intend for the senators to become senators? Do you remember the 17th Amendment? Let's go back in time. April 7th, 1913. If you remember your Constitution, the 17th Amendment calls for direct election of senators. But how was it for the 120 years before that? They were appointed. The way the Constitution was originally framed was that each state would appoint their own state senators. So when the state legislature met, they would send delegates to, think of the Constitutional Convention, there were delegates sent to whoever it was, Faneuil Hall, to debate the forming of the government. So the way it was originally, yes, today senators are elected, but that's not the way it was intended to be. So in my opinion, the 17th Amendment was one of the worst things that we could possibly do, because it took power away from the states and it gave more power to a strong central government. Consider this, the way the Founding Fathers intended for this to be was that the power would rest with the states. The states would send a representative off to talk about protection of our rights, our property, our liberties. And if a U.S. senator wasn't representing us, well, they would be called back, and someone else would be sent in their place. So I would submit to you that the way it was intended is that senators were appointed. How about the House of Representatives? They're elected. So who is represented by each of these groups? Let me ask it this way. Who does the president represent? It's not us. The president represents the states collectively. How about the judicial? The Supreme Court. They're not beholden to anybody. The Supreme Court is independent. Independent from states, federal, any individuals, special interest groups. How about the Senate? Well, we just talked about that. The Senate represents individual states. And the House of Representatives really is designed to be representative of all of us. So it should represent the
Districts.
Yeah, the districts, the people at large. Let's look at terms of office. Presidential election comes up once every 4 years. Judges are appointed for life. Senators are in office for how many years?
6.
6. And the representatives? 2 years. We elect new representatives every 2 years. Well, in their wisdom, our founding fathers knew that power has to be balanced or restrained. Which of these 4, I know this is Congress, but really we should look at them as 2 different groups here. And I know I'm already low on time, so I'm going to ask the questions, but I'm going to answer them here. Our founding fathers decided, the group that handles the payroll or handles the treasury, basically, is the House of Representatives. These are the most powerful group. Now, the president can get us into a war, but it's the House of Representatives that would pay for it. The group that has the most power has the shortest tenure. We don't like what they're doing. They can only screw with this for 2 years. The second most powerful office would be that one that's in operation here for 4 years. So this would be the second most powerful. The Senate, third most, and the Founding Fathers designed it so that the least powerful agency would be the Supreme Court. But because of my red line here, because oligarchies and kingdoms and democracies are all run by man, and man is fallible and corruptible, what ends up happening is everybody's still vying for power. Now we see Supreme Court basically legislating from the bench, because now they refer to case law instead of the rule of law. It's another place where America is straying from what our founding fathers wanted. Case law is a bad thing. Case law is taught in almost all law schools today.
In other words, you mean precedent.
Exactly. How did we do it before? Instead, we shouldn't be looking at what happened last time this issue came up. We should be going back to the original source document. Each time we stray a little more, stray a little more, stray a little more, we keep over time. You know, if you were to shoot a laser beam at the sun, you don't have to be off a whole lot before you totally miss the mark. So now this again, I'm concerned about my time here. So let me kind of go quickly. All of our founding fathers were Christians. We could define founding fathers several different ways. I don't know how you define them. There were 55, some say 56 signers on the Declaration of Independence. There were actually 56, I guess, in attendance, 55 signed. I mean, there's different ways of defining that. But if we look at a broader scale of those that signed the Declaration of Independence, Articles of Confederation, the Declaration of Independence, and served on the Constitution, yes, and the Articles of Bill of Rights, and served in the First Continental Congress. There's some overlap, but there's about 204 people there collectively. Is that what the
Sounds good to me.
DAR goes by? When does the DAR, do you go back to those 56 signers, or do you go back to just anybody who was...
Anybody that was involved in the
Revolutionary War.
War, the founding of our nation.
Okay, well, then good. You'll allow me to have a more broadly defined terms here. Well, of the 204, what I would call the bigger pool of founding fathers, 55% were Episcopalians.
I'm having trouble hearing.
There were 55% of them were Episcopalians. Let's say Episcopalians or
Church of England.
Anglicans, because they came from the Church of England. So the Church of England, the Anglicans, kind of like the Catholics, I guess. There were 3 Catholics, but so that might raise the number to 58 or whatever percent. But that church has a strong central government. That is, they've got one strong central authority figure in that church government. Well, there was also a group of 17% of our founding fathers were just what's called congregational. They were a much more independent church. They didn't believe in a church hierarchy, and that's more analogous maybe to the Senate. The rest were Presbyterian. I say the rest. Many more. There were 7 Quakers and a couple of other miscellaneous religions, but the preponderance were Episcopalians, congregational, and the rest were Presbyterians. And the Presbyterians, I hope there's no Presbyterians in here that are going to critique me for this, but basically Presbyterians, oversimplified, kind of work 2 ways. There's a top-down chain of command in the church, and there's also kind of a bottom-up chain of command. So what I would like to do is draw some analogies, metaphors, if you will, between the Episcopalian style of church governance, strong central figure, and the other religions that what I'm suggesting is that our founding fathers may have viewed their own church structures as they formed our own central government.
They looked at what they knew, right?
Exactly. They looked at what they knew. So one of the things they knew was that our rights come from God. Now, how am I doing on time? Right?
You're okay.
I'm
You have
okay.
Maybe 10 more minutes.
All right. I want to respect your time. How many countries believe that our rights come from God? And which is the first country to recognize that? The United States was the first. Today, what other countries believe as we do that rights come from God? Israel is correct. There are no other countries other than the United States and Israel that believe that our rights come from God. If our rights come from the king can take them away. If they come from the dictator can take them away. If you think that our rights come from a democracy, from the mob, boy, I would not want to live in a place where I felt that my rights came from my neighbors. Because as soon as the neighbors don't like my music, my lights, how infrequently I mow my lawn or anything else, I'm going to lose those rights.
That sounds like a condo association.
For many years, I was president of my condo association. And anytime anybody put a towel or anything out on a fence, they got a letter from me. Let's say that you want to borrow my car. If I were to loan you my car, would it be unusual for me to say, yes, you can borrow my car, but I don't want you to take it west of Interstate 5, or don't take it north of Sacramento, and don't take it south of the border? Would that be fair restrictions to put on that?
Sure.
Okay. What if I wanted to make a $10 million contribution to the DAR, and I said I want this used for scholarships? Would you take that? But what if I said, I'll give you $10 million for scholarships, but I only want scholarships going to people from Hillmar, Ceres, Riverbank? Would you accept that? You would turn down my $10 million? Because you'd lose your freedom. The point that I'm making is, typically the one who is granting the authority is the one who can put the strings on it, who controls. So if man gives you certain rights and freedoms and privileges, then that same grantor, the source, the grantor, can also limit those rights and freedoms. Did you know that in the Soviet Union, they also have a Bill of Rights? They have freedom of speech. Their Constitution, which looks very much like ours, they just have some extra stuff in there. Their Constitution says, or their Bill of Rights say, you have freedom of speech as defined by law, or as prescribed by law. You have freedom of press as prescribed by law. You have freedom of assembly as prescribed by law. You have freedom of religion as prescribed by law. Because their rights to press, religion, assembly, speech, etc. are all limited by the grantor of that, which is that oligarchy, another man. Our powers, our rights came from God. God didn't put any strings, any limits. But there's other forces that work trying to limit us, to suppress us. So as you go off teaching about the Constitution, there's one basic fundamental, some considerations. You got to look at the source of our laws, the source of our freedoms. And if you don't agree that the source of our freedoms is God, then you cannot, you will not be successful at promoting patriotism, preserving our history, and securing our future. You can't teach government without teaching God. you see, there's really two forces. When people are out debating birth control, do we fund birth control or not? Do we fund abortion or not? Do we, think of a big tree, and these are all branches or leaves on the tree, and as the wind blows, we bicker about budget and foreign aid and all the, really, it's not about, just like the spotted owl. Remember the big controversy over the spotted owl? Well, liberals now confess it really wasn't about the spotted owl. The spotted owl was never in danger. The issue was federal control of forests. They used the spotted owl as a distraction. So if you go off and try to fight the battle about the spotted owl, you lose the bigger picture. You see, the bigger picture really is it about God or godless? Something else. Atheism, even deitism, deists. Because from that comes the question of creation versus evolution. If the rover on Mars were to find some microbial bacterial life, can't you imagine that all the newspapers the next day, the headlines would be life discovered on Mars? Now, it's only a bacteria or a virus, but it's life, right? That would be exciting news. But if there's a child in your room with a heartbeat, brains, movement, responds to sound, responds to touch, heart beating, well, that's not really life. That's just like a tumorous mass because it's not life. Well, you see, you can't have it both ways. If you believe in evolution biologically, then it serves to follow that you would believe in evolution socially as well. And therefore you would also believe that law also evolves. On the other hand, if you believe that our rights came from God, that a God exists, that we were created by a God, and that our law, like the Ten Commandments, are etched in stone, then that's unchangeable, that's unmovable. It doesn't evolve. So a metaphor to use with kids would be like the animals out on the plains. You've got a gazelle and a lion. Now, if you believe in evolution, then you would agree that the gazelle has no rights. If the lion is faster, stronger, smarter, it eats the antelope or the gazelle. Survival of the fittest. If I'm smarter than you, faster than you, louder than you, whatever, I can take anything that you have. I can take your purse, your property, your life, and there's no consequences because we are simply animals on the Serengeti. And the lion will always eat the prey, right? So when the government says, what we're here to do is protect you and your rights and your liberties, but we're also here to ensure social justice. Now in your creed you talk about justice. That's one thing, but social justice is entirely different. Social justice says, you have a nice watch, but she doesn't. So I'm going to take from you and give to her. That's social justice. You cannot both protect somebody's property rights and redistribute wealth socially. They're just mutually exclusive. So as you're teaching or educating educators about patriotism, about American history, and securing America's future, the fundamental core principle that you have to include, the root where these two branches separate, all comes down to, is there a God or are we godless? We've got time for questions?
Sure. Anybody have any questions?
I give you a different perspective on the Constitution?
How long did it take them to work all of this out?
I mean, I do know that Patrick Henry made the same statement in his famous speech, or around it. He made the same claim that God, it's our God-given right. Freedom is our God-given right. How long did it take them to come to a... Well, they couldn't have walked in one room and in one day done all of this.
I suppose it must have been closer to 20 years. The Tea Party happened December of 1773, but that's probably, I don't know, the Bill of Rights wasn't signed, I think, until 1787, if memory serves me right. So, no, it wasn't.
Oh, it took a long while.
But we could also go back to the Puritans and the Mayflower, because they were looking for religious freedom as well. So it kind of depends on how you define the terms. I mean, we could say it took 100 years to get to that point. When the U.S. signed a peace treaty with England, Sam Adams, everybody thinks of Sam Adams as beer. No. Samuel Adams said, "Today the king is restored to his throne." Now think about that. If we signed a peace treaty with the King of England, what would Sam Adams mean when he says, "Today the king is restored to his throne"?
He could stay in England and rule England.
I submit he wasn't talking about the King of England. He was talking about
Oh, okay.
God.
Yeah.
Because on that day, when we had finally defeated the British, that's the day that it was known that we were now a country founded on religious principles and religious freedoms. Any other questions?
When you said,
Yeah.
We are based on God, or rest from God, it suddenly hit me that Bush said God wants us to get rid of Saddam Hussein. Was he thinking of that when he said that?
Well, it's easy for people to defer to God. God wants me to have another slice of cheesecake. God wants me to... So sometimes that could be used as a crutch also. So I don't know if God speaks to George Bush. Only that's a conversation between God and George Bush. It could be that George wanted that. I don't know. Other thoughts, questions, criticisms, disagreements? Well, thank you for having me.
Something to think about.